to turn it on? Is it working? Hello, good evening. I'm Robert Bergerhoff-Mulder, and I'm the director of the Center for Dutch and Flemish Culture. And I'm really delighted this evening to be able to introduce Professor Thomas van Leeuwen, who is our guest and who's the Professor of Architectural History and Criticism at the University of Leiden. Professor van Leeuwen is going to talk in connection with the launch of his book, The Springboard in the Pond, which is an analysis, a look at the architecture of swimming pools. And this is published here in England by the MIT Press, to whom I'd like to say thank you to Anne Twistleton, who's also been organizing this evening. And I'd also like to say thank you very definitely to Mark Cousins here at the Architectural Association for giving us the hospitality this evening. This is the second time, Professor van Leeuwen, that you've come here. The first time, I think, was in 1988 in connection with your book, The Skyward Trend of Thought, which dealt with the metaphysics of American skyscrapers. And I'm very much looking forward to your talk this evening. So, it's the floor. Thank you.
Zo.
For this afternoon's feature attraction. Hey, over there. Yes, I mean you. Your attention, please. Are you ready in there? Feature attraction.
Could I speak to you for a second, Dan?
Listen, now I'm going to ask for a big round of applause to bring this boy out here, all right? Now, wait a minute. Oh, let me amend that. To bring this young man out here, because today he is 21 years old. Oh, now just hang on a minute. I've got a few words to say.
Yes, you always do.
Oh, look who's talking.
Dad, can we just talk about this for a second?
I can't hold them much longer, Ben. You better get out here.
I'd like to discuss this.
This boy, I'm sorry, this young man is soon to continue his education as a Frank Halpingham Award scholar. But before he does, you're disappointing them, Ben. You're disappointing them.
Dad, can you listen?
I'll give you 10 seconds. He is going to give us a practical demonstration of what I feel safe in saying is a pretty exciting birthday present. And it better work, or I'm out over 200 bucks. Okay, then, let's hear it now for Benjamin Brenner! Yay! Come on, Benji! Come on, Benji! Let's hear it now! Attaboy! Now, folks, this remarkable young man is going to perform for you some spectacular and amazing feats of daring in water that is over 6 feet deep.
a scene of horror and desolation. What was intended to be a joyful gathering around the pool, family fun, yet nobody in the pool, and the only one who enters the pool does so in protective clothing. It demonstrates apocalyptic clairvoyance on the part of Dustin Hoffman as the graduate. The best way to avoid nuclear fallout or ultraviolet radiation is to sit on the bottom of a pool in a protective rubber suit. This is one of the many illustrations of the title of the book. I took the subtitle, An Intimate History of the Private Swimming Pool, and in this case it underlined the concept of intimate. How intimate? Well, in this case, to a degree of in-depth psychoanalysis. This whole idea of an oncoming disaster that you see in the desperate isolation of the graduate in his protective suit, his rubber suit, brings me to a point that I'd like to underline before, instead of, well, I announce it now and talk about it later, and there will be a couple of minutes to ask questions after the lecture, and then I will go deeper into this idea of the tetralogy of this 4 books on the elements, air and water and fire and earth. But before I do so, just a story that I'd like to tell you in relation to this frogman's protective rubber suit, and which give you an introduction to this idea of the 4 elements. There is a story that somebody told me, I think it was in 1985, by a friend with whom I spent some time in the south of France, and he got it from the newspaper, the Nice Matin, and it was after a devastating forest fire in the area of Sainte-Maxime. And in the newspaper, there was this mentioning of a man that they had found in the charred forest. There was this skeleton that they found, that rests of molten rubber on his bones, and he was wearing a scuba diver's mask and flippers. That's what they could reconstruct. And it was suddenly clear to most people what had happened. The Coast Guard has airplanes, and they are fireplanes, and they scoop up water from the sea and they dose it. It is not funny. They dosed the fire with large quantities of water, and they, by accident, had scooped up this scuba diver, Robert. And there is this, everything is in it. There is man who comes down from the air with water to put out a fire, and finally he finds his final resting place in the earth. We will talk about the 4 elements later. This is part 2 of the tetralogy. The first one was about air, the skyscraper, dominance over the air, several powers that claimed dominance. The third is fire, it's called columns of fire, and the 4th will be air, earth, which will be the last one. Okay, it is the history of the private swimming pool and not the public pool. Somebody asked me in an interview, radio interview, why I didn't select the public pool, and then I replied that if I were asked to write a history of the automobile, would I like to write about the autobus? No, he realized that private pool was probably the thing to do. And there's another reason, and it has to do with the construction of the book, the general organization of the book. It is the private pool, because, and not the public pool, because it is, as an architectural type, the smallest atomic unit you can possibly imagine. It is that modest hole in the ground that has no pretension whatsoever. It is that squarish thing that sits in the ground. And there is no other architectural type that even gets close to its unpretentiousness. It is so simple, and yet it gives way to all sorts of speculations in the field of history of religion, philosophy, sociology, and everything. And it has that marvelous quality that you could always return to it. It never gets muddled. The story about the private swimming pool will always remain clear. At least that's what it does in the book. And I'll tell you this, that it is, because it is very, very complex material, all this, why does man swim, why does he do it, why isn't he afraid, how did he overcome his anxiety, and so forth and so on, could only be made clear by making complex things simple. And one of the things that really succeeded in the book was that, with the help of my editor, Helen Searing, who is here, who made my Atlantic English into real English, and to Jean Wilcox, who designed the book, and she lifted out the things that could speak a very clear language, and that was, most of the time, they were pictures. It is a sort of fröhliche Wissenschaft. Things that are difficult have been made easy, and there are people who read this book who had no practical training at all, no architects, no philosophers, and then after a while they say, oh, I've understood it, and I would never have done it without the help of these people who made it such a wonderful looking book. Okay, this modest hole in the ground. The other part is, of course, swimming. And swimming is a complex thing as well. Because the history of swimming is the history of its own instruction. In the book, I went to the public pool in order to illustrate the history of instruction. I have woven other things in the total construct. For example, water. Water has its own history. There are several periods of water. One is, to begin with, the sacred period, when water was sacred, and nobody dared to go and sit in the water or swim in the water for pleasure. That became a thing that was normally considered to be an Enlightenment thing, and it happened somewhere in the middle of the 18th century, where Jacques Rousseau started to teach his pupil Emile the art of swimming. Water that had been submitted to the actions of man lost its original innocence. The springboard in the pond brings forward the image of a springboard from which man could dive into that originally sacred element. The springboard changes the element from sacred to profane. Every piece of water, whether it be reverential, monumental, as in this case, will change by the introduction of a springboard, of a diving board. It happens when you look at it. It happens in your head. Then you suddenly see that the water has changed. It has been changed into athletic water. It has been domesticized. It had been submitted to the pleasures of man. The third period is the period of the vulgar. The moment that water had been flushed away in the water closet together with human excrements. That was what water killed, of course. Perfectly drinkable water. Filtered water, as the Ocean Park bathhouse in Ocean Park in California says proudly in this postcard. Some people drink it, but we bathe in it. Another way of organizing complex matter is by singling out human attitudes towards water in terms of hydrophobia, hydrophilia, and hydroambic production. There is a magic melody Mother Nature sings to me. Can you imagine? They were there in the nude. The only thing that they had was their hair, long hair that protected them. And the other was Tarzan the Ape Man, 1932. Tarzan is totally acceptable. Tarzan was a noble savage. He was also a transitional creature. As a swimmer, for example, is this our countryman, Dutch-born Johnny Weissmuller, Olympic medalist, who became the first Tarzan, the ape man, a swimmer. Isn't that a beautiful illustration of Alistair Hardy's theory, which at that time was developed but didn't get into the public eye because Alistair Hardy was a little afraid that his theory wasn't sound. It was only published in 1963. But anyway, there is some sort of a understanding there, unwitting. Tarzan was potent, he was innocent, he was also charming. In fact, he was the ideal son-in-law. There were lots of bourgeois utopias there that could be easily realized in suburban life. The little house, the tree house, the little pond, the natural pond. And to the American public, he was, because of his background, having no past, he had ideal upbringing, he had no history, no nasty English background or European or whatever. He was born in the forest, got his excellent education by apes and elephants, noble beings. And he was able to communicate with the animals of the forest, but also with the folks back home. And what Tarzan does with Jane is very noble, is a very innocent, and also a very risque thing. Because what he does in Tarzan the Ape Man is that he brings Jane, as you see on the left-hand side, into some state of unbalance. And then he draws her, well, he doesn't have to draw her, she goes by herself, into the water, and they stay in the water for a long time. And they make love, I guess, and they lived happy ever after. The interesting thing is that they do it in the water. And strangely enough, and also this is another story of this extraordinary research that we had to do is that one architect, Mark Pence, he had an architectural practice in Los Angeles downtown. He one day called me and he said, there is something funny there. I'm working on a lot and I looked through the fence and I saw that thing there. And it looks like a concrete river or something. And I drove over in my convertible Cadillac and we looked at it, and it was a house, we found out later, that was owned by Mary Astor. And I later read that Papa Astor put a mortgage on the house, Mary wrote, of $22,500 and went ahead with his swimming pool. And the swimming pool was 100 feet long with dressing rooms at one end and a sandy beach at the other. Artificial rock with steel rings to hold lianas, a dark lagoon, lush vegetation, and a grotto with a barbecue set. And the house is on Temple Hill Drive and the Hollywood Hills, and it is a mixture of Moorish influence and jungle pool seduction. It is a pool that Tarzan could have swam in with Jane. And they could pretend that they were Tarzan and Jane. The pool is dry. The children played there, and they smudged it with graffiti, and things were stolen and so. But it was still there in its former shape, and must have been a terrific thing to swim there. And then, after we found this pool, there was somebody who told us that there was another one, not far away in Bel Air. And we went to Bel Air, and we had to keep the dogs busy. We had another dog who could do that much more adroitly than we could. And we slipped through the fence, and we made some quick photos. They're not all focused because I was so afraid of the dog that I had to do it very quickly. But that was a pool that was originally made for a businessman called John Zublin. And this was a veritable swimming river, 300 feet long. It was built in 1931. Paul Williams, the society architect, by the way, built the house. And who did these pools? Well, these pools were built by a man called Philip Ilsley. And Philip Ilsley was a Canadian who came to Los Angeles in 1925 to set up a landscaping firm. And he began to include swimming pools as part of the garden layout. And that became paddock pools that Philip Ilsley ran until his death. And Philip Ilsley also built a pool for somebody who was in the same league a little bit as Mary Astor. They were not bombshells. They were not sexy bathing beauties, Joan Fontaine. But there was something in these ladies there was some burning desire. There was a dream there. And Philip Ilsley told his interviewer that Joan Fontaine had obviously seen Bird of Paradise. And there is a clipping from a newspaper that said that Bird of Paradise dresses in that sort of Pacific flower pattern was very popular. And Joan Fontaine is wearing a dress like that. And she said to and Ilsley told about her, most of the unusual patterns of swimming pools, of free-form swimming pools with grottos, were dreamed up by customers who could afford some latent longing. Actress Joan Fontaine apparently dreamed of being a mermaid stranded on a rocky island. She was a wolf in a flower dress. The free-form pool is the domain of the frog. Esther Williams, who performed in the Ziegfeld Follies film of 1946, plays with amphibians in a sort of bowl in which he performs the role of a goldfish. And there is a film still, and I thought that film still looks very much like, she looks very much like that girl in that brochure of Philip Ilsley for paddock pools. Now you must remember that I get these brochures from somebody with no pedigree. There's nothing that indicates that it came from there or came from what and what date. They were not dated. So I tried to find out whether Philip Ilsley used Esther Williams. It looks so obvious for that campaign, because the girl in the brochure swims in one of these swimming rivers that I was trying to determine. But there is something wrong there. The girl wears a bikini, whereas Esther Williams never wore a bikini. And the bathing cap is different. And well, anyway, it's that girl. It's the girl from the cover. There's a cover girl. And it is one of the girls that Philip Ilsley invited to pose for him for his new house and swimming pool in the San Fernando Valley, a thing that he built for himself. As an accomplished pool builder and a man of means by now, he built a hepatica leaf pool for himself. Pools appeared in all sorts of shapes in that period, and we are talking about 1946, 1949. And you see there the bathing beauties are there, and Philip Ilsley, I think he was left or right, I'm not so sure, manipulating a film camera, a photo camera. And he, as a non-swimmer himself, testing merely the cover of a swimming pool rather than diving into the real thing, he used sort of sprayed concrete, gunite as was called, on his swimming pools, his free-form pools, because of course you couldn't tile those things. And he was a photographer. He liked to make pictures, and he made these pictures underwater through portholes and so forth. We have seen the frog and the swan and the penguin, but there is still something of this anxiety and this fear for water that remained. There was always a fear of a major catastrophe, a deluge. We live with it. The movie stars had to live with that. Hydrophobia was always a guest in the swimming pool. But later, all these anxieties, all these phobias, they sort of got a new domain to be exercised in, and those were the new delusions of pollution and the world that would perish, and especially Southern California there, where all these ecologies of fear are much more distinct than they are here. I like this bathing beauty in the rain. And there is another problem, apart from the environment, and that is that pools are very dangerous things. They are dangerous for children, they are dangerous for vagrants, they are dangerous for drunks who walk by accident into a swimming pool and drown, and the owner of the pool is liable. Litigation began to make an end to the innocent ownership of a swimming pool. And in 1942, something awful happened. One story that is so meaningful that I couldn't keep it from you. The 2-year-old grandson of Cecil B. DeMille, who himself owned a small circular swimming pool in his garden, ventured into the neighboring garden of actor, comedian, and legendary mysopodist W.C. Fields and drowned. This is awful. We all knew that W.C. Fields hated children, but this is going too far. Jack Benny had a swimming pool fitted out with an octopus on the bottom so it could scare off children who wanted a try. The only safe pool, of course, is a dry pool. In 1986, the Orange County Swimming Pool Association published the following news: with more than 300,000 pools in the area of South Los Angeles, drowning is the single largest cause of death for Orange County children. So filling up pools was the thing to do. Oh yes, people made Japanese rock gardens out of the swimming pools. They also made tennis courts out of them. At least, I mean, they were filled in and they put a tennis court over it. But that was a little bit of a problem because everybody had a swimming pool in the garden. And so if you have a tennis court, you need 2 people, and since everybody had another tennis court, there was nobody to play with. Another thing to do was we missed one slide there, whatever, it doesn't matter. Was to put fishes in your pool and make it into a fish pond. It was said of Charles Lee, the cinema architect, the swimming pool in the backyard of his house in Beverly Hills was converted into a lake engineered with electric boats and a pier for his grandchildren, and later became home of a koi collection. Now, koi is of the carp family. There are Japanese carp that were so engineered that they showed their beautiful colors. They're like goldfish, not only on the side, but also on the back. On the back, because normally you cannot see the colors. These ones were so designed that you could see them from above, and therefore they were ideal swimmers for the new swimming pool that had become a piscine again, as was it in the old times. Humans dug holes in the ground and filled them with water, fitted ladders and installed springboards. Then they added disinfectants and coloring agents, but eventually, apprehensive of what they had wrought, came to shun the family pool, influenced by environmental superstition, fear of litigation, and perhaps most of all, boredom. First, they banned the springboard, then they banned their children, and then they banned themselves. Now the road is free for a new generation of social swimmers. Goldfish, koi, yes, even sharks begin to populate the family pool. The circle is complete. The piscine has been restored to its original state. Thank you very much.
down your swimming pool was a bit military, you said there must be nicer ways. When you see the swimming rivers, is that going to be your nicer way, or was there, did you come across any other nicer ways to swim in the pool during your research?
Well, the free-form pool was the answer to the rigidity of the public pool. And the variety of things have been practiced in free-form pools. And swimming followed the path of what frogs do, therefore I use the metaphor. But I mean, athletic swimming, who swims fastest, is in a certain way a perversion, is an oddity, because it is well known that man squanders energy while swimming, and it looks all very impressive, but he doesn't get very fast through the water. There's only one animal that swims slower of all animals, and that is the mink, as somebody told me who knows very much about this sort of thing. So man is the slowest swimmer of all species. The slowest. We see this big deal of world champions who race through the water, but it is very slow. You walk faster. And all animals swim natural. You turn them into the water and they can swim. The rhinoceros probably also. Hippopotamus does swim very well. The elephants swim. There's hardly an animal that you could mention that doesn't swim. Only man has this problem. Yeah, I think that in the primates of the savannah and in the forest, then you have problems with they have problems with swimming. They don't like it so much. Yes, sir.
You've obviously studied America, and America leads the world in hotel building.
Yeah.
When you go to resorts now, wherever it may be, the Caribbean or wherever, the swimming pools are maximum 10 to 15 meters long. And if you're a real swimmer like me, you have to go to an old hotel because you know they'll have a really long swimming pool for proper swimming. Now, why is the modern trend this way? What's the etymology? What's the reason why the trend is to lots of small pools rather than one big pool in a deluxe hotel?
Well, I think that I'm not very much of a specialist of great public hotel pools, but I think the trend, as I sketched, is that people need all sorts of incentives. This is sort of the penguin complex. That there are very few swimmers, as there are very few runners and cyclists who like to get tired. And so most people swim in overheated water in things that look more like pleasure parks than in serious swimming pools. And I think the trend is to seduce customers and to lure people into these hotels is that they feel like that they are doing anything, but they are not doing anything, and that the water is too warm and they don't have to work for it, and they cannot swim like you. You cannot swim in these pools. They are too shallow, they are too varied, they have all sorts of shoots and things and attractions, and it is almost impossible to get some exercise. But that is the trend nowadays. People have no exercise and they don't want exercise, and if they do exercise, it is an outside agent that they stick to themselves that sort of stimulates the muscles. Sorry, the what? Oh, the springboard is a completely different history. That is a little. That's a thing that it's very difficult to research. There are several origins that you could point at. One is that springboards were installed in Holland and in England in the end of the 18th century, in the 19th century, in the 1830s, in the times of the Reform Bill, and one was to simulate the action of diving overboard a ship in order to salvage a shipwrecked mariner. So there was a simulation sort of machine. And then, as Charles Sprossen in his marvelous book, The Haunts of the Black Masseur, demonstrates, that springboards developed not necessarily with water as acting as a cushion, but on the dry for trampoline jumping and all sorts of gymnastic exercises. And I think that here Friedrich Wilhelm Jahn comes into the picture because he invented all these machines to exercise the unexercised body of his troops and the military men, and in the Turnvereine where they did gymnastics, and there the springboard comes into the picture. There was one more question there.
Yes, if I can just go back to the previous question about the hotels, the now-called leisure centres. Never see a hotel advertised in a swimming pool, and they feel they have to do them because otherwise business may go elsewhere. And I have seen the statistics which show that the use of swimming pool, the leisure centre, and particularly swimming pool in the leisure centre, is as little as 1%, but that's up to about 4%. But they feel they have to provide it, or else the business will go on.
Absolutely.
But my question I was going to be asking you was its historical look up to how recent a history does this book take, because I can think of one particular well-known swimming pool which features a lot in this country, and that's Davis Hockney's Los Angeles.
Yes. Well, I don't have it in the book. I don't have it there because he didn't want me. And I said, no, if you don't want me, I don't want you. Because I called him several times, and I know I wanted to talk to him. He said, no, I'm busy, and I said, oh, well, I'm busy too, and to hell with you. I don't have his pictures in my book.
When does it start to become fashionable to be found dead in a swimming pool?
Well, it all starts with, there are several historic examples. One is King Romanos III, who was murdered in his bathtub. It's in Byzantine times. Then, of course, there's Marat, who was killed by Charlotte Corday, and but then it was not fashionable yet, I guess. It became fashionable with Sunset Boulevard, I think, where the poor man is floating like a spider on the surface of the pool, and then the comment is, poor sot, finally he got his own swimming pool.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, Thomas, I really want to thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. I missed one slide, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Joel?
Yes. Sure thing.